Hey, Nick. Hi, everybody. We see we have some attendees on. Welcome, everybody. We have a great lineup today. This is our first of the first four that we already posted on social media webinars from Janover. One of the things I want to point out is Janover is really focusing in on getting correct information out there. There's a lot of wrong information because people were focused on getting it out quickly. We're going to get it out quickly, but we're also watching very carefully to make sure the information that we're providing is correct. Today is focused on cannabis. We have a great lineup. The head of economics for Vicente Sederberg, Andrew Livingston, and we have a great New York attorney with us from Bressler, Nick. And right now, I'm going to pass it on to the moderator, Zach Gordon from Janover.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. And Jason, thank you for the lovely introduction. So we have a wide array of content for you today. And it's very exciting that we're able to actually talk about cannabis in an environment like what we're currently experiencing. So we're going to outline a few different things, talk about the broad economics of what's happening now, what key changes we think we're going to face, what the impact of Corona is on the cannabis industry, and where we go from here. So now I'll let everyone do a quick introduction of themselves. So Andrew, if you'd like to say a couple words.
Yeah, thank you so much, Janover, for welcoming me onto this webinar, and thank you everyone who is listening from home. So my name is Andrew Livingston. I am the Director of Economics and Research at the law firm Vicente Sederberg, LLP. We are a national cannabis law firm with offices across the country in New York, Denver, Los Angeles, Boston, Washington, D.C., Jacksonville, Florida, and others. And we cover cannabis 100%. So marijuana business licensing, corporate transactions work in the space, hemp and cannabinoids, all of which right now, as well as the entire U.S. economy and global economy, which are being impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, I'm happy to chat with all of you today and discuss some of those economic implications and what we are seeing from a supply chain perspective, as well as a demand and supply perspective.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much. Nick, would you like to take a moment?
Sure. My name's Nick Komyati. I'm with Bressler, Amery, and Ross. We are a full-service law firm headquartered in New Jersey with offices in New York, D.C., Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Birmingham, Alabama. We were in the process of opening a North Carolina office, but with everybody working from home, we are, I think we pressed pause on that project. But we're a financial services concentrated firm. We do a lot of work for a number of different broker-dealers, financial institutions, insurance companies, and we also provide advice in the cannabis industry, both to those plant-touching entities, to ancillary service providers, and other entities who have to deal with the regulation due to the unique dichotomy the industry has with the various banking regulations and guidance that's in this space.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Glad to have you on board.
No problem.
Then Jason, just a quick introduction of Janover.
Sure. So Janover is a full-service accounting firm for approximately 200 people. We only have offices in New York, but we operate in all 50 states for various reasons. For cannabis, we operate in 22 states right now and growing daily. The only things we don't do are PCOB audits and oil and natural gas work. Everything else, we basically have an advisory practice, a consulting practice, and our fastest growing practice is the cannabis consulting, which has me and Zach are the leaders, and we have over 8 years experience each. So that's us on cannabis.
All right, thanks, Jason. So to kick it off, we want to give Andrew the opportunity to give his perspective on where the industry is. So he's done an extensive amount of research, and it's very fascinating to hear what his thoughts are, what the data says, and what the specific impact of Corona has on the cannabis industry to this point. So Andrew, if you don't mind taking a few minutes, just walk us through what you've seen to this point.
Absolutely. So, first I'll start this off by, setting a framework for a little bit, because while we're seeing businesses being forced to close across the country, retail businesses and restaurants requiring to go to curbside pickup only, we're seeing something similar in cannabis. But what's important to recognize is that cannabis businesses, while many medical businesses across the country are being deemed essential, marijuana businesses in almost every place across the country were illegal a decade ago. So in a single decade, we have moved from being completely unlawful to being deemed essential in states around the country. Thankfully, we are really seeing a lot of, positive movement and many different governors and local officials trying to find ways to make cannabis businesses able to stay open rather than forcing them to close. Now, that being said, we have seen so far the first state to require adult use cannabis businesses close, and that was Massachusetts, which is starting actually around right now. Midday today, all adult use businesses in Massachusetts now have to close. The medical businesses are allowed to stay open. In other states, we're seeing either extreme distancing requirements, so you can only allow 1, 2, maybe a few in addition to employees, customers into your stores, or we're seeing in states like Nevada and Colorado a requirement, at least on the adult use sides, and in Nevada in both sides, to go to curbside pickup only or delivery. So this is really going to shift things going forward. So in addition to the business operations issues, which predominantly are limiting employee contact with each other, limiting the number of customers within the facility, requiring or pushing towards delivery or curbside pickup, we're also seeing some shifts on the physician sides as well. So issues like telemedicine, which in many states were not permitted for cannabis, are now being allowed. So hopefully, in addition to medical marijuana patients being able to actually go to stores and having a little bit easier access than on the adult use consumers, it's going to be easier to become a patient by now just phoning up a physician and getting a recommendation through that storefront, through that side of things. This is happening really across the country. And so in the similar sort of way that we've seen executive orders from governors mirror each other. So, at first we saw, okay, you can't have groups larger than 100, or you can't now have groups larger than 50, or now you can't have really any groups together at all outside of, your immediate household when you're outside. We're seeing a similar sort of structural dynamic with regards to the cannabis licensing agencies and regulatory agencies mirroring each other as we move forward. So, to say the least, this is a dynamic, moving and evolving process. And we just yesterday saw the first state move to require adult use stores close. Sadly, I don't think that will be the last state to do that. But it's important that we not only show best practices from the cannabis industry side, but to continue talking to our regulators and our government officials to ensure that businesses can stay open safely for as long as that is possible.
Great, Andrew. I mean, that's amazing analysis. Jason, Nick, do you have any follow-up to that?
I was going to just add in. It's a nice sign of the development of the industry, obviously, as you see it. But from a practical perspective, you have the cannabis industry being basically divided into the two halves of essential and non-essential businesses, and it's going to be tough to argue with state regulator that the adult use is an essential business, where I think the argument that the medical portion of the industry is an essential business, I think will be an impossible argument for the government to make that it is a non-essential business, because the reality is that there's laws on the books in all of the medical states which have deemed the cannabis industry, medical marijuana, to be medicinal and inherently be something that is an essential business, which would necessitate workarounds in order to provide safety, but also to allow for these businesses to continue to operate.
Yeah, I would also add in that it is still federally illegal, and there's still outdated laws at the federal level that are causing issues for some of these companies. We're going to get into more of them, but no, I did hear that, in part of some of these coronavirus federal level legislations, there is some talk about 280E because some of these businesses, if they have to close and they can't deduct stuff and they still have to pay their rent and whatnot, and they can't make sales, they might go out of business. So this is a real issue for cannabis companies in particular because of the 280E issue at the federal level.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. So now that we've explored some of the broad changes, what's been most surprising? So Andrew, again, we'll start with you. What of all these broad changes has caught you by surprise?
Yeah, I would say, to me, the most interesting and surprising thing has been the level of policy creativity that we've seen governors and regulators really kind of put out there. So we are seeing some different structural dynamics when it comes to the limits and way that curbside pickup will be authorized. So in some places like in Oregon, you can deliver to a car within 150 feet. In other places, curbside pickup requires you to be on the licensed premises, under their control, so parking lot or a vestibule in front of the building. And in other places, you're seeing just an expansion of existing delivery allowances. One of the things that has surprised me is that we haven't seen states that didn't have delivery on the books just immediately allow that. Now, that may be because the security issues associated with delivery are a little bit more complex than curbside pickup. But I would think that those sorts of issues to me are really the most interesting and the most surprising about how fast this has moved forward.
Amazing. Jason, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, so from my perspective, there's a lot of interesting things happening right now. The most interesting of which that we didn't see a dip in marijuana sales, that we actually saw a big increase at this dispensary level. That did not trickle down to the cultivation and processing sales to the dispensary, but dispensaries in the last 2 weeks have the ones that we've been talking to and nationally have had their best sales in weeks. Now, we do anticipate that is mostly because of people hoarding it. They want to get it. They don't want to go back out. They might be locked down. They might be in quarantine for a while. But we also think that there's an increase in the market consumer. People that used to go to work during the day might be at home now, and they might say, hey, especially in adult use states, hey, why not? I can now smoke more, or I can now have more product available to me. So it is, I really thought that states were going to close it down faster. I am shocked that only Massachusetts has. I don't think it's the last one, but adult use is definitely going to be an issue. But even elsewhere, the sales are up. Now that hasn't trickled down yet to the cultivation and processors, but if the sales continue to rise because of this, and while it's still in quarantine and while people still have a lot of free time and they're not working, hey, it could be a supply chain issue in the near future.
Do you think this is Jason, do you think this is a permanent change, or is this something that is just temporary, a result of people hoarding, panic buying, anything to that effect?
That's a good question. I'm going to pass on to Andrew after this. From my perspective, I think it might be short term as people get back. Short term meaning as long as there are some quarantine issues, as long as there are some self-isolation issues, there's going to be an uptick of the number of people purchasing cannabis. And there's also going to be a little bit of the hoarding, and they're going to increase their use. Once this goes away, I do think the economic effects are going to turn around. A lot of places that furloughed workers or laid off workers, they're going to go back into business. They're going to start hiring again, and people won't have the time to, especially in the adult use states, they won't have the time to do it, but also they're not going to be worried about their supply anymore. Right now, I think it's a big nervous consumer base about the supply, just like toilet paper. So I'd love to hear what Andrew has to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I think that we will see is a bit of a boom bust. So there's a number of reasons. First is that this is obviously a rush to build up internal, home supplies. Everything from canned soups to toilet paper, as we all been talking about, to cannabis, liquor, and hand sanitizer. And so, once people have more of that supplies, they hopefully won't be going back to the store, or maybe not hopefully, but they likely won't be going back to the stores as frequently. That's going to be the case for cannabis, in the same way it's going to be the case for supermarkets as well. Once you filled up your whole refrigerator, you can't really go back and stock up in the same way. But people are preparing for complete lockdowns. Now, while that's being said, whether it's, you've got a lot of extra chips at your house and you find yourself munching because you're at home, or whether or not you have a lot of excess cannabis at your house. And well, what we've seen in the past is that when you have a lot of internal
in there somewhere.
Yeah, when you have a lot of internal supplies, you tend to consume more, right? So, if you only have an eighth at your house, you may only smoke, at the end of the day. But if you've built up an ounce at your house, and the reality is that the cannabis is eventually going to go bad, you're going to be looking to consume more and more frequently. So from a demand perspective, that will increase the actual consumption, in addition to potentially the amount of purchases. But that being said, we need to look at this from both the mid and the long-term perspective. So we are starting to see states, already moving to curbside only. So in addition to essentially allowing in-person purchases as well as curbside, some states are going curbside only. And so this is just going to limit the amount of throughput you can have at a retail store, right? You're going to have a lot of demand, but you can't service all of that demand in one day. And so that will drop the amount of sales that you'll be able to have over the coming weeks. Furthermore, once states start to really go into lockdown and people are kind of scolded for going out of their houses potentially, you may start to see some of that demand decline. Now let's just talk about the long term post-coronavirus. So eventually this will pass. Hopefully we all think it's going to be sooner rather than later, but at this point we do not know. But after this is done, our country and the whole globe will face a pretty serious recession. People are, being out of work right now, and this is going to continue for weeks. And so once that happens, we will start to see demand come back. But the question is there the same sort of demand for high-end cannabis products or value-added products that might be more expensive? Or will cannabis consumers be looking towards cheaper options because they're recovering financially from this economic downturn?
It will be very fascinating to see what these net effects are and where the recession plays a part. Nick, from your seat, what has been most surprising from your side?
Well, I just wanted to follow on to a few things with the long-term implications and where I see things. So just sitting in New Jersey, what's happening here, what we're seeing is incredibly long lines at dispensaries. We're seeing stores get completely sold out. We're seeing the state rapidly allowing for curbside. New Jersey has, was kind of hamstrung by 8 years of Chris Christie, basically cutting the legs out from the entire program. So what this has done is it's spurred the industry here in New Jersey to rapidly adopt changes, and the Department of Health has went from no way anything other than in the store to curbside to allowing for internet orders and things like that, where you can just pick up, so you're limiting your human interaction, where I don't really see those things changing. I think that that's here to stay. I think that once this pandemic is over, those things are going to stay. I also think that potentially, while there may be a recession, I do think that you're going to see states looking towards legalization in a little bit more rapid fashion. So maybe it's just wishful thinking on my behalf, but judging by the fact that a lot of states now to deal with the coronavirus pandemic are releasing nonviolent criminals from prison to keep the community spread in the prisons down. I think that that's generally non-violent criminals are usually drug offenders. So it seems that some of the more progressive states are getting their arms around the idea that the criminalization of marijuana smokers is not the right way to move forward. And I think that that's going to be accelerated in a recession, because it just doesn't make sense for states to pay for people to sit in jail for nonviolent crimes, and turning a negative cash flow negative incarceration to a cash flow positive legalization and tax, I think will be something that a lot of states and eventually the federal government are going to rally around.
I think Nick nailed on something, and I also want to add that, you know, the legalization is definitely going to speed up. They looked at New York City alone, and there's going to be a $4.8 to $6 billion hit because of coronavirus, depending on how long it lasts. And that's estimating just, you know, if it lasts long, that's long term is June. If it goes beyond that, it can be even worse. They're going to look for revenue enhancements. They are going to be looking for ways to cut other costs, including, you know, jails and whatnot. But I do think that states that were on the fence are going to look at this and say, we need revenue, and that's going to be added. I still think that there's a federal issue still, and the federal government's going to either come out with something. I don't know which one it's going to be, but it's going to be something in the size of $1 trillion or $2 trillion. And if this goes on longer, possibly $3 trillion. To give you an idea, the whole U.S. government spends $3.3 trillion a year on everything else. So they're going to look for revenue enhancements, and, you know, so 280E, you can look at it double. If you get rid of 280E, there's more businesses that'll open up because it's more viable, but also that is a revenue suck because marijuana companies are paying more taxes right now, not less. So it can go either way.
Yeah, you know, just to continue on the discussion of what we're seeing in the legislatures over the next few years. So, you know, sadly, we're likely going to see a delay, if not, you know, we've already seen a delay in legislatures passing adult use legalization this year. So New York looks like it's teetering on whether or not it will be added into the budget. Looks at this point more likely than not that it will not be added in. You know, we've also seen legalization stall in places like Connecticut and others because many of these legislatures are shutting down, due to the coronavirus. So this is going to essentially bump some of the states that are kind of quote unquote due for legalization this legislative session into the 2020 year. So I think that could be a banner year, in addition to just we are seeing across the board, this is going to be a serious issue for state budgets, right? States have to balance their budgets, and they're going to be trying to find new opportunities for new revenue going forward. So, you know, that's both good and bad. You know, another consideration, something we have not discussed so far, but which will affect the amount of states that are going to be moving forward on legalization over the next few years, is that, you know, this is absolutely impacting the ability to gather signatures to get legalization on the ballot for the 2020 year, both at the state and local level. So in some states, Mississippi, South Dakota, and New Jersey, but of course New Jersey was a legislatively referred initiative, those have already made the ballot. So we will see those in 2020. But in other states like Ohio and Missouri, which, you know, started their signature campaigns a little bit later, it's going to be unclear whether or not they can make the ballot. And in Ohio this morning, I saw that the Secretary of State had rejected the ballot because it had not even collected enough signatures for its initial procedural review. So, you know, the other state we may or may not see is Arizona, which started its ballot collection much earlier. But this will impact the total number of medical and adult use states that we will see on the ballot in 2020 that would have likely passed, considering where the population is right now on both medical and adult use.
Overall, and this is a question to all of you, it's a very broad question. Are you bullish on where the market is going in all these states that could potentially turn on over the next 2 years? Do you think that at the state by state level that it is a net positive, or are we going to see overall a bit of a slowdown?
So, you know, I would say that across the economy, you know, COVID-19 is in pretty much no way a net positive, unless maybe you're in the hand sanitizer industry or the, you know, probably not even toilet paper. And so this is going to just hurt the economy across the board. Now, as far as being bullish on the cannabis industry, yes, in both the mid and long term, absolutely, I am bullish on this industry moving forward in a pretty serious, significant way. Cannabis consumption has been growing in the United States, and every day there are more cannabis consumers in the United States than there were the year before. That's based upon kind of the population dynamics, the structural change in ages, across the United States as kind of the generations continue to renew. Now, what we are seeing, and what I think we'll likely see, is that once these adult use states do open up, it's a little bit slower than it was in these initial states in places like Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. And Corona will delay some of that initial licensing. So, I look at a place like Massachusetts and Illinois and wonder how much more delays are there going to be for additional adult use stores, cultivation facilities, and others, which will impact the ongoing supply chains, particularly in those states that have had supply issues even before the virus. Those will persist longer than we might expect.
So I have a little bit of a different outlook on the long term. For the long term, I really do believe, I've always said it, the biggest players in cannabis space in 10 years are not going to be the biggest players today. You might not even see some of the biggest players today make it through the next 10 years. They might be, merger and acquisitions for sure, but some of them are going to go out of business. There's definitely going to be a consolidation in cannabis over the next 10 years. COVID-19 actually might have changed that a little bit. Capital definitely dried up in the summer of 2019. It wasn't necessarily picking up in 2020, but there was more capital flowing back into the market than in the fall of 2019. So all of a sudden now the market lost billions of dollars. There's a lot of people out there that aren't going to be putting it into as risky businesses. And because of these delays in legislators, because COVID-19 is actually delaying some companies that were not up and running, it's getting the companies that were up and running are getting a bigger foothold. So I can see now that some of the bigger players, this might actually help in the long term because of competition. So also, we didn't even get into it yet. I guess we'll get into it soon, but basically the supply chain of new producers, right? So me and Andrew were having a conversation before this about what is happening to the supply chain. Now, if you're already operating and you're already growing and you've already been selling for a year, your supply chain issues are the packaging and getting products out there, but it's not really affecting your growing, right? Most of that stuff was stateside and it shouldn't affect too much. But if you're about to do a build out and you need equipment, builders, even just to build, I mean, we're real estate too, Janover, we're a big real estate firm. Just getting equipment to build is going to be an issue. So the people that did have a foothold in those states are definitely getting an advantage right now. And, I might, me and Zach are going to have to talk, but we might have to change our 10-year outlook to say, hey, when the consolidation does happen, some of these bigger players might still be around.
And that is very true about the evolution of the market. And this was something that no one could have seen coming. And it will be fascinating to see how businesses do adapt, how market consolidation is affected. Before we head to that point, Nick, I just want to send the same question to you as far as if you're bullish on the market.
Yeah, I think that what we're going to see is it's going to be a little bit choppy waters. You're going to see a spike now, obviously, with everybody fearing that the end is near, and if they're going to be stuck in their house for the next 3 months, they might as well make sure that they're, their cabinets are built with everything. Ironically, one thing that I wanted to throw out there, I've been reading a lot that because it's a respiratory illness, the COVID-19, actually edibles have skyrocketed. The sales of edibles have skyrocketed. I don't know if that will continue to stay, but the largest growth segment was in the edible area. But yeah, I think that I just think that at this point, people have realized that there's bigger things to worry about. And you're going to see even red states get a little bit more friendly, and as the number of states increase, it's just going to become bigger and bigger business. Now, the one part where I know Jason and I kind of went back and forth and a little bit when we've talked offline, I still think the states are going to be extremely parochial. And I think that you're going to see some of the larger entities have problems getting into given states. I do think there will be consolidation, but I think it will be a little bit more Frankenstein monster rather than just, big weed coming in and taking over. I do think that there's going to be, the states are going to be protective of their little industries to build their plans out as much as in the shape that they want them to take, especially more so in the more heavily regulated states like New York and New Jersey. I don't think it's just going to be carte blanche to the larger existing entities operate, either Canadian or West Coast operators.
Very good points. And we've talked a lot about the economics, about the market. How about the labor side? Now, do you see, Nick, start with you on this. Do you see any major net effects from the rise of remote working in just how labor has changed exponentially over the last few weeks?
I mean, well, judging by the fact that I had my technical difficulties today, I couldn't get my Mac to communicate with this app. We
won't tell anyone else about that.
I think that you're going to see some changes with the way things. Well, you've seen them already. I think that there actually could be more jobs in the cannabis space due to the fact that if this pandemic, much to Trump's chagrin, lasts a little bit longer and people can't just start running back into offices and can't go to business as usual, you're going to see a proliferation of delivery people and other people who are going to be employed in different roles. That could be an uptick in reviewing people's histories, background checks, things like that. I could see that, yeah. So I could see the industry's labor force changing a little bit, but I think at its heart, it's really just an agricultural industry, and then obviously you have your manufacturing piece. And I don't know how you could really have a grow operation without having people on site. I mean, you can keep them 6 feet away from each other, I guess, but I think that at its core, the cultivation piece and the manufacturing or extraction, however you want to call it, or edibles, would remain mostly the same. I think your dispensary could adapt. I think the dispensary can adapt the most to the unique challenges that we're facing.
And as part of the industry evolving and changing and adapting to this new time, what potential litigation do you see happening? And obviously it's very difficult to be precise and would never hold you to any of this, but are there any areas in particular that you see potential for litigation?
I mean, look, I think in this situation, I see potentials for litigation with what's going on right now, pretty much everywhere. Because the cannabis businesses have not really shut down other than Massachusetts today, I think that that's going to be mitigated. I actually think other industries are going to have much more ripe litigations, especially when it comes to landlord and tenants and force majeure provisions and contracts, where you're basically going to be on the hook, even though the government says that you can't go into your office. You need to pay that landlord now. I think that's going to be some litigation. I think that those provisions generally hold up, but that's not to say that people aren't going to try to negotiate a better deal. And sometimes litigation gets used by that. But I think you could see if there are supply chain disruptions, I think that you could have some issues there down the road. But I think it's a little bit early to forecast the types of litigation that we're going to see. But I think it's fair to say that there's going to be a lot of litigation that comes from this entire pandemic. But I honestly do think that the cannabis space is in a little bit better position because of the medical necessity that at least a good portion of the industry has associated with it.
Great, thank you. That's very insightful, actually. Jason, I would throw this over to you. So we've talked about the litigation side. Now, as far as legislation, what do you see coming out of this? Taxation or other?
Who knows? At the beginning of this, I saw, because cannabis is a job maker, the states that have medical or adult use cannabis, they are producing jobs. Originally, I said, okay, maybe the government will get rid of 280E and it will get people to throw capital behind, not maybe get rid of 280E, but at least deschedule cannabis. So there's no 280E effect. So people that have capital will get behind this business, and there will be, as soon as this is over, a growth in the business, and they're going to hire people, right? We're going to hit, some estimates are 20, some estimates are 30% unemployment in this country in the near term. Yes, that is short term. Andrew talked about how it's going to be a recession for a couple of weeks, possibly months, depending on how long this plays out. But that's one area where I was really gung-ho on it, and then all of a sudden I was like, wait a second, the government's going to need more money. This is a big revenue enhancement for the federal government. And by the way, a lot of states are tied to their tax laws to the federal government. Even states that are legal, you still can't deduct a lot of expenses. And because of that, it increases the tax effect to the states, to the federal government. I can see in the future states that aren't up and running with it yet, getting it on the ballot sooner. I think that, once again, New Jersey, Andrew talked about being a legislative move. I think more states are going to possibly go that way because they're going to need money, right? Just look at New York City. I love the New York City numbers because they actually published them. $4.8 to $6 billion, right? That's in one city in America. Nationally, states, localities, the federal government, they're going to be looking for money. Some people will say at the federal level, $2 trillion over a $30 trillion deficit. Okay, it's not a big deal, but it is, and they're going to have to somehow pay for that. We just increased our deficit by a few years very quickly, and we don't know what our tax revenue in the states, localities, and the federal government is going to be in the future. So I really don't know what the tax laws are going to be because you can go from both sides. I would love to see it be descheduled just to get more capital into the business, and it's a more effective business, and it would also help the states a lot, but I'm not sure that's actually a realistic approach. From a state perspective, I heard what Andrew said. I still think that states are going to start moving faster. During this COVID-19, Zach, you and I were on calls with some of the New York State people discussing how to tax cannabis, and they're using our model. And even though Governor Cuomo at the time was talking about COVID-19 on air, they were still talking to us. So I think the people that have his ear are definitely still going to be whispering, hey, this is a revenue stream for us at a time when we need it. So I do anticipate some states, and yes, it might have to wait till 2021, but this can push efforts because of that.
Now, do you think that is a net positive? Do you think that the legislation they'll put together, the programs at a state level that they put together, will be a net positive just because, as you said, there is a crunch for new tax revenues that maybe they foresee not existing from other currently established industries?
So as we saw with the New York model that we saw coming from Cuomo's office, and Janover was lucky we had a chance to actually show him our model. Depending on how you tax this, can have a big effect to the consumer on the price. And if the price goes above a certain point, they're going to go to other states. They're going to go to the black market. The black market is still there. And if it's cheaper to go there, no matter what the states do, even if they pass it, if they're just looking at this as a revenue enhancement, it's not going to be a positive effect to the state.
Is now exiting.
So we really have to look at the longer term outlooks, because if they're just looking at this purely as revenue enhancement and they're not really behind it, will states get on board? Yes, but it's not going to be a good program, and it won't be positive to the state. It won't get rid of the black market or the illicit market, as I was told to call it by
unknown participant people. Is now joining.
So I really don't know what's going to happen, but I can see states that were on the verge picking it up quickly after COVID-19 because they need the revenue. And I hope it's not just a revenue enhancement. It really is the social programs that other states are doing. It really is the getting the cannabis to the people that need it if it's a medical program.
Great, perfect. So we've talked about the litigation side, we've talked about the tax. What about the new opportunities that are potentially out there? So Andrew, I would throw this over to you. We see the industry changing quickly in light of COVID-19 and in light of all the potential new legislation that's coming. What opportunities exist that may not exist yesterday or today?
Yeah, so I think the most obvious one is this hopefully will accelerate the pace of states moving forward with delivery. Not only delivery, but online sales transactions. It's one of those things that, many states were reluctant to move forward with, allowing online sales transactions and, allowing delivery because of the security issues. And as long as the industry is responsible and is able to actualize those sales avenues responsibly and safely, I think that some of that in some states, not all, states, will be able to continue after the virus has subsided. And so, if you're a business that does applications, you might see new opportunities in actually being able to effectuate a full sales transaction rather than just kind of a pre-order. And you may be able to engage in full-on web-based delivery, logistics platform. So that I think is probably the most obvious moving forward. That we may start to see cannabis be treated like so much of our other economy when it comes to on-demand online ordering and delivery.
Perfect. And so you mentioned online. Mm-hmm. Now, we know, I think in the early days in California, you could get a medical card via a webcast and it may have been a little less than, right. It may have been a little less than above board in some cases, of course.
No.
Is there the opportunity for that type of delivery service to get people through a more simplified onboarding process in these different state markets?
Sure. I mean, on the medical side, I think we could see a continuation of telemedicine. I think there's a lot of physicians that are reluctant to do that unless there is, right now, the absolute medical necessity to shift over to telemedicine. But we could start to see in some places that opportunity where it currently is prohibited. So, across the board, I think that as long as businesses behave responsibly, this emergency will show to regulators that they can back off on some of those sorts of, I would say, reluctance to allow online cannabis business activity because of the ways that, they were just, fearful of the industry. But even with this new allowances, we're dealing with some hurdles. And the biggest one is the lack of payment processors, right? You can allow a business to sell products and effectuate transactions online. But if you can't accept Visa, MasterCard, or American Express, and if you can't work with a payment processor or merchant processor, it's going to be really difficult. And most of those are still wary about jumping into the cannabis industry because of the federal illegality.
Yeah, now you're jumping into a lot of the things that this is like an entirely separate webinar about the AML issues. But I've talked a lot about these issues facing the banking and securities industries. And it's ironic to me that the goal of the anti-money laundering laws is to prevent money laundering. And what you have here is a system where you have predominantly cash businesses, which are inherently more difficult for the government to trace where the money is going. So it's just an unworkable situation all around. And if they really want to have the goals of what the laws are, which is to see where the money's going, to make sure that illicit proceeds aren't being funneled into whatever industry it is, they really need to pass the Safe Banking Act and allow access for the various financial institutions, merchant processors, to interact with the cannabis industry, because right now you're just defeating the laws based on the fact that, no, I don't like this industry and we just want to make it difficult for them. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
You beat me to the point about Safe Banking Act, so thank you for
sorry,
that.
I didn't know if we were going. I didn't know if we were going there, and then.
No, it's perfect actually. So
yeah. we can go there. Before we go there, though, if any of the attendees have questions, sorry, we set this up without the question and answer segment. Please just email zachary.gordon@janoverllc.com. And as we're talking, as he gets questions, he'll read them aloud. We're happy to answer them. And now I'll let you guys go back to the safe banking conversation.
And please keep them tasteful. Yes, Nick, sorry. So yes, the Safe Banking Act, and do you think it's a net positive? Do you think it's legislation that can actually work? Does it go too far, not far enough? What are your thoughts?
I think any step to bring the financial markets and the industry together is a positive step in the right direction. I always think that there's never a perfect piece of legislation. You can always improve on it, but yeah, allowing the financial markets and the banking industry into the cannabis space is just a net positive from both an industry, from dealing with it from a financial institutions perspective, which I do, and dealing with it from a cannabis industry perspective, which I do. It, to me, it's a positive on every side. You can talk to anybody who works at any financial institution in their AML departments. They are getting crushed with issues, both on marijuana and hemp. I'll just for ease. But hemp for years was just an agricultural good, and things were sold and company, and there were people who operated in the pilot program, and they had a securities account, let's just say a brokerage account, and it was no big deal. But as the Farm Bill was passed, it started to become an issue, because now the regulators were looking at this as, well, the FDA says it's going to regulate. How are we going to treat the proceeds from this? So it became an issue when the intent of the bill was for it to not be an issue. So it's just an unworkable situation right now. So yes, I think the SAFE Act would be just a giant step in the right direction for the industry and for the financial services industry.
So do you think it get passed? It's going to get passed?
No, never.
Of course.
I agree that it's never going to get passed. I have a little bit of a different from the practicality side. From the practicality side, the Safe Banking Act, I don't know how much it's going to do. We've spoken to a lot of larger banks that are FDIC insured, the major ones. Goldman. If this passes, Goldman's still not probably going to touch it. J.P. Morgan Chase, Citibank. All these big players are still not going to touch it, and so you're still.
I would add the asterisk, knowingly touch it.
Yes, knowingly. So from the practical aspect, even if it passes, I'm not sure what it's going to do for the actual plant-touching cannabis companies, right? I think they're still going to have local state players, smaller banks. We do see already some local FDIC-insured banks touching cannabis and banking to that industry. But I don't think it's going to go much past that. So some more smaller ones will open, and it will be easier for Andrew, myself, Zach, and Nick to actually work with clients to get banking set up. But from a large perspective, the major institutions aren't going to touch it until it's descheduled, until it's not a 280E issue, until there's no risk and their outside counsel is going to approve it.
I meant to mention descheduling. I meant to mention descheduling as well. Obviously, is something that needs to occur. But to the extent the largest guys aren't there, just having additional availability from some of the mid-market, and as you mentioned at the end there are some of the FDIC-insured banks already getting involved. So I think that this would obviously expedite that process.
For sure, and I think just having a clarity of a framework for all of us to work through, I think that makes all the difference in the world. Just a general question for the three of you. We've seen some predictors out there, some economic studies that range anywhere, anticipating 5 years market revenue. What's the size of the market? It's gone anywhere from 15 billion to 30 billion to 100. It depends what you read, who you believe. Andrew, I guess we'll start with you. If you had to give an over/under at 20 billion over the next, in 5 years, that's the size of the market, where would you sit and why?
Yeah, so my general thought is that we will be over 20 billion in the next 5 years, but not over 50 billion. So I peg us probably somewhere between 20 and 50, but that in large part depends upon what the bigger states do and how they actually not only legalize but effectuate those sales, right? So there's more cannabis consumers in the Los Angeles metropolitan area than there are in Colorado, Oregon, and possibly Washington combined, right? So we've got a ton of people in certain places. New York City alone, as a cannabis market, is worth multiple billions of dollars. So the real question is, we can see New York legalize within the next 5 years. I think that that's almost a certain fact. When within the next 5 years is really that big question. But even after they legalize, the question from there is it effective? Right? We have not seen so far legalization be truly effective in the city and county and areas in Los Angeles. In certain places, it's moving forward, but the black market is still huge. So unless New York City is able to actually transition its black market, and it's going to be dealing with even less built licensed infrastructure than Los Angeles has, that may take longer than expected. And we might not see as many cannabis consumers in New York purchasing from their legal stores, if things like delivery aren't immediately allowed and really prolific.
I agree with Andrew 100%. I think what we're talking about, first of all, cannabis already is a bigger than $50 billion a year industry. It's just in the illicit markets. And we have to convert that to legal markets. A lot of that has to do with price. A lot of that has to do with convenience, but also it has to do with just the stigma of cannabis. If the illegal, cities like New York, they're not coming down hard anymore on the people that are selling cannabis anymore, illegally. If you can sell it illegally, not pay your taxes, not do anything, you can keep your price down. It's not as good of a product. So obviously, as we see over the 5, 10, 15, 20-year period, people are going to really be a little price sensitive to the product type, right? So the illegal markets don't have the same product that the legal markets do. But the states are going to have to build programs to get people set up, and the people want to go to the legal stores. Delivery is a big one, but also it's just to be, how hard is it to get a card? How hard is it going to be on, for the medical side, for doctors to write it? How strict is it going to be for adult use? Is it going to be more like liquor where you just show your ID and you're done? Or is it going to be you going into a database? They're going to track it. You can only have a certain amount if you're buying too much. And we're seeing that's a wide range, and it really depends. I do 100% agree that the legal market will be over 20 billion in 5 years. But once again, that Andrew nailed it. It depends on New York getting up and running, New Jersey getting up and running. Illinois is already somewhat up and running, but if their rec market, adult use market really comes to be, that's another huge state. Michigan, who every economist I spoke to in the cannabis space thinks it's going to be a top 5 market, even if you believe it's a top 7 market, they haven't got up and running. They were not able to get things built. Capital has been an issue because of the way they structured their rules and their laws in Michigan, right? So I think Nick touched on it. Some of these states are requiring that they want the small guy to be it, not these multi-state operators. So Michigan is open. It's a very open state. Anyone can go get licensed, but the amount of documents you have to produce, the amount of information you have to provide them, a company that has 1,000 investors, it's just not realistic for them to get into the Michigan market. Each investor, if they're over 1%, originally, it's hopefully move to 10%, has to put up every bank account, every K1, everything, statements, the works for 3 years, right? So any type of person that's putting in a few $1 million into that market is going to have to produce thousands upon thousands upon thousands of paper, sheets of paper, and it's have to go to them. It has to be vetted, and they ask questions, and they have to have fingerprinted. So it really is going to depend. I think that you could hit that $50 billion mark if there's some changes at the federal level.
Great. And Nick, same question to you. Over under?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair range. I definitely think it will be over 20. I think 50 is probably a little bit high, just based on the fact that people are the states are going to drag their feet a little bit, and I don't think the feds will open up. I will say that with respect to New York and the difference between New York and LA, I mean, New York's never had a proliferation of trap shops and legals, but kind of illegal operators. New York's had their delivery services and things like that, but I think that if New York opens up a robust legal adult use market, it will have much less competition from the black market than what we see in LA, which is obviously like the epicenter of that.
No, I think that's very fair, and I think converting some black and gray market, specifically within New York, to the open market really accelerates everything, and you're right, it does skew the numbers up. All right, so we seem to be approaching the end of the hour here, so why don't we go to final thoughts? So any final points, anything that you want to get across? Nick, I'll hand it off to you. Anything you think we should know?
No, right now I think that the key here is it seems like there's every day there's an update, a change. I think the closure of some of the adult use facilities is obviously upon us in Massachusetts. I think we'll see more of that, which will be problematic. But ultimately, I think that the industry is going to be looked at towards as a potential springboard to help drive some of the states out of the recession that's obviously occurring right now and inevitable. And I think that it is a great sign of progress to see that the states are adhering to the fact that they've deemed this a medical product, and it's medically necessary for people, because the reality is that it helps a great portion of the public, and without it, I think that we would have a lot more paranoia and anxiety going on, given the fact that we're all trapped in our houses for 24 hours a day.
Well said. Jason?
Yeah, my final thoughts basically come down to what's happening right now. The economy is in peril. The federal government's got to come out with a rescue package. Cannabis is not going to be part of that, but it's all about the trickle down. People are out of work, they're saving money, they're not going to spend as much money on something like cannabis, right? Especially in the legal markets, where they can get something sometimes cheaper in the illicit markets. So as that starts to trickle down, the rescue package, as people start to get up and running again, it's going to be great. Over the next few weeks, as Massachusetts shutting down, I think is great for other states, because people are getting scared and they're going to start hoarding. They're going to go back to their dispensary, even though they don't want to go out. They're going to get more product. As Andrew said at the beginning, if you only have an eighth, you're going to smoke an eighth. You're going to wait to the end of the day. If you bought half a pound, you have more. And I do believe with the edibles, as we saw Ohio, we saw that people were going to multiple dispensaries. Okay, in Michigan, there's a lack of product. The price per pound shot up, and the price per edible shot up. It wasn't price gouging; it was just supply and demand. So once again, we need to get people quickly into this program, and we need that, and we just need to waive the coronavirus right now. There's going to be supply chain issues. There's going to be some issues. People are going to go to dispensaries. They might not be stocked because dispensaries aren't ordering from the cultivators right now. But in the end, it's going to be okay. It's going to level out, and there's going to be a robust program in many states.
Great, thanks, Jason. So Andrew, final thoughts? Anything you think that the public at large should know right now?
Yeah, I would say obviously the first thing is listen to medical professionals. Listening to the public health professionals is important. Particularly in places where we're seeing hotspots and we're seeing a lot of outbreaks. That being said, get the necessities you need. And if you're a business operator, the most important thing for you to do right now is keep your employees on the payroll. So whatever you can do to keep that happening, because it's not only a cost that ripples out into the rest of the economy, it's going to be a future cost for your business. If you're letting people go that are important employees now, they may find a new job before you have the ability to hire them back. And so doing what you can to kind of keep yourself operating, even if it's cutting other non-labor resources and non-labor expenditures, is key. And so tighten your belt, but also be thankful that regulators across the country are allowing cannabis businesses to continue operating, even if it's in a more limited fashion.
That is
one thing to just adding on that with keeping employees. A lot of the states are working on programs that will reward those entities which keep people on the books. In other words, you won't qualify for the programs. Now, that's also development.
Most of those programs will not be allowed for cannabis companies.
Well, I guess we'll have to see, right?
Yeah.
Even at state level, I guess. Well, I guess
Yeah.
we'll see. But you're probably right.
All right, great. So I think that was a great way to end this, talking about the more positive side to this. I think weathering the storm and figuring out a way to come together as a community, and that's really what this is. So I do want to thank everybody for attending our first webinar. This is an ongoing series. We'll be putting out content every Tuesday and Thursday. So please keep your eyes open for future links, future events. And if there's any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. A follow-up will come after this. I really want to thank Andrew, Jason, and Nick for participating. This was a lot of fun, actually. So I hope we can do it again really soon. And again, thank you guys so much.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thank you. And wishing everyone the best.
Bye.
Take care.